Welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our journey through the MPE, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure.
Right, that big book that guides how the U.S. PTO looks at patent applications.
Exactly. And our goal here is simple. Break down these dense sections into something more, well, digestible. Spoken overviews to help you understand the process.
And today we're hitting a really crucial one. MPP, Section 608. It's just called disclosure.
Disclosure. Sounds fundamental. It's in Chapter 600, which covers the application's parts and form, right?
That's the one. Section 608 is basically the heart of how you describe your invention in the application. It sets the rules for telling the world what you've actually invented.
Okay, let's dig in. The whole patent system at its core, it's like a trade-off, isn't it?
It really is. You, the inventor, potentially get these exclusive rights for a set time.
But the catch is,
The catch is you have to fully teach the public about your invention, how to make it, how to use it. Section 608 spells out exactly what that teaching requires. It's your side of the bargain.
and this comes straight from the law.
Yep, directly from the patent statute, specifically 35 U.S.C. 112A. It mandates, it basically says your application has to include a complete and enabling disclosure.
Okay, what does that mean in practice? It's not just like hinting at the idea.
No, definitely not hinting. The standard's quite specific. The disclosure must be full, clear, concise, and exact.
Full, clear, concise, and exact. That's a high bar.
It is, and the purpose is clear. It's so that a person skilled in the relevant art.
Okay, stop there. Person skilled in the relevant art. Who is that exactly? Like a genius inventor.
No, not necessarily a genius. Think of them as sort of the average practitioner or engineer in that specific technical field. Someone who knows the basics, the existing technology, the common problems and solutions in that area.
Got it. So this average expert needs to be able to do what?
They need to be able to make and use the invention without undue experimentation.
Right. Without undue experimentation. That phrase pops up a lot. What counts as undue? Is any experimentation okay?
Well, some routine experimentation might be acceptable, optimizing things slightly, but undue means you shouldn't have to spend excessive time or effort or invent new things just to figure out how your invention works based on the description.
So it can't be a puzzle.
Exactly. The courts often look at factors like how much guidance is actually in the patent, how complex is the field, is it predictable or unpredictable? If you're in biotech, for example, you might need a lot more detail than if you're, say, tweaking a simple mechanical clamp.
Makes sense. So what actually makes up this critical disclosure when you first file the application?
It's mainly three things you file initially. The written specification, that's the detailed description, plus any original claims you included. And importantly, the drawings.
Okay, the spec, original claims, drawings, and this is where we hit a massive rule in patent law, right? The one about changes.
Absolutely critical. Anything you add, later amendments to the description, changes to the claims, even new claims, all of it has to have clear support, a solid descriptive basis, right there in what you originally filed.
This is the infamous no new matter rule.
That's the one. You cannot introduce new technical information or concepts into the application after your filing date that weren't already described or, inherently suggested by that original filing.
Why is that rule so strict?
Because the filing date locks in what you invented at that time. Allowing new matter would effectively let you claim a later invention under an earlier date, which wouldn't be fair to the public or other inventors. It protects the integrity of that filing date.
So trying to sneak in something new later is a big no-no.
A huge no-no. It's a common basis for rejection during examination, and it can even be used to invalidate your patent years later if someone challenges it in court. That initial application is your blueprint. You can't add a whole new wing to the house later that wasn't on the plans.
Okay, so given that you're stuck with that original blueprint, what must be in the specification to meet the Section 608 standard from the get-go?
Well, first, you need to describe at least one concrete way to actually practice the invention. One specific version, or embodiment, as they call it.
Just one. Or more.
At least one. More is often better for broader support, but you need at least one solid example. Then you have to explain how it works, its principle of operation.
And you also need to show how it's different.
Yes, you generally need to explain how it distinguishes itself from what's already known the prior art. What problem does it solve? What makes it an improvement?
Like the example in the MPP about improving an existing machine.
Exactly like that. If your invention is an improvement, you can't just vaguely say, it makes the machine better.
You have to be specific.
Very specific.
Mm.
You need to clearly identify which parts you've improved, describe those improvements in detail, and explain precisely how those new or modified parts work with the existing known components of the machine. You're giving that skilled person the actual instructions.
Okay, so that covers the substance, the teaching part of the disclosure bargain. But Section 608 isn't just about what you say. It's also about how you say it, right? The formatting.
Yes, it absolutely gets into the practical rules of the road, the procedural and formatting requirements that ensure the application document itself is clear, usable, and, well, proper.
And these aren't just arbitrary rules.
Not usually. They serve a purpose, making sure the application is easy to read, process electronically, and becomes a reliable part of the public record if a patent is granted.
So things like how the pages actually look.
Right. Basic stuff like the specification needs to be submitted on separate sheets. They need to be clearly printed or typed.
Makes sense.
And you need to avoid informalities. Things like using inconsistent terminology throughout the document, or having really messy line spacing, or lots of typos.
What happens if it's just a mess?
If there are too many errors, if it's just really hard to understand or process, the examiner can actually require you to submit a whole new substitute specification that cleans everything up.
Okay. I did see one interesting detail about spelling "they're okay with British English."
Yes. As long as the application is in English, the examiners are told not to object to British spellings like color or analyze. A small but practical point for international filers.
But on a more serious note, there's guidance about content that's not okay.
Very important guidance. Under Rule 1.3, examiners must object if the application contains language or drawings that are offensive, scandalous, or just generally inappropriate.
And the reasoning.
It's simple. The patent system creates a public record. That record shouldn't contain material that's considered harmful or offensive. It's just not in the public interest.
Okay. What about things you can put in the spec besides just the technical stuff? Like legal notices.
Good question. Yes, you can include things like copyright notices or mask work notices, say if you're including source code or chip layouts, but there are conditions.
Such as?
Usually you have to include specific authorization language right at the beginning of the specification, basically giving the USPTO permission to copy the application as needed for processing and publication.
And what about disclosing research agreements?
Yes, if your invention resulted from a joint research agreement, JRA, you can disclose that in the specification. This can sometimes help overcome certain types of prior art rejections.
Can you add that later if you forget?
Sometimes, maybe. There are provisions to potentially correct an omission later, maybe even after the patent issues, but it's often subject to strict timing rules and usually extra fees. Best to get it right the first time.
Right. So back to the basic document format. What are the key rules just to make sure the document is acceptable for filing?
Pretty straightforward stuff, mostly. Text should be typed in a standard, non-script font, no fancy calligraphy.
Okay.
You need clear margins around the text. You can't write the entire thing in capital letters. Imagine trying to read that.
Oh gosh, no.
Pages need to be numbered consecutively. And critical parts of the application, like the claim section, the abstract, any sequence listings, they must each start on a completely separate sheet.
Why separate sheets for those?
Primarily for organization and processing. It makes it much easier for the office to handle the different parts, especially with electronic filing systems, and ensures clarity when the patent is eventually published. It helps maintain the integrity of the whole document structure.
It sounds like a lot of little rules, but they add up to making the whole thing work smoothly.
Exactly. They facilitate review, publication, and long-term archival.
Now, Section 608 also goes into detail on some really specific formats, like for biological sequences or drawings. Those seem like areas where you'd need extra care.
Oh, absolutely. Those can get complex. Take sequence listings, long lists of nucleotide or amino acid sequences.
Right, like for biotech inventions.
Precisely. For applications filed from mid-2022 onwards July 1st, 2022, specifically, you must submit these sequences electronically using a very specific format. WIPO standard ST1026.
ST1026, what's that?
It's an XML-based format. It replaced the older text-based ST.25 standard. It's designed to be more structured and computer-readable for databases and searching. There are specific rules about how you structure the file, the information you include, like organism names, feature tables. It's quite detailed. You usually need special software to create these files correctly.
And all that sequence data goes into its own file, not necessarily repeated in the main description.
That's correct. The bulk data lives in the official sequence listing part, which is often a separate electronic file. However, if you mention a specific sequence anywhere in your main written description or claims,
Yes.
you must refer to it using its specific identifier from that official list, like CQID-ODO or CQID-NO25. That creates the link back to the authoritative data.
And if you need to change a sequence after filing, say you found an error.
Uh-oh. That gets complicated. It's not like just editing a paragraph. You generally have to submit a complete replacement sequence lifting file.
Whole new file.
Yep. And along with it, you need to provide very specific statements. You have to state exactly what was changed, confirm that all the changes have support in the application as originally filed.
Ah, back to the new matter rule.
Always back to new matter.
Uh,
And you have to explicitly state that no new matter has been added. It's a careful process to ensure you're only correcting errors, not adding substance.
Okay, that sounds like something to get right the first time if possible.
Yeah.
What about drawings? What are the rules there?
For most patents, utility and design patents, there are basically two categories. Black ink drawings, which are the standard, and color drawings.
Black ink is usually required.
Yes, typically done in India ink or something equivalent, clear black lines on white paper, or the digital equivalent. Very specific standards for line thickness, shading, numbering of parts, etc.
When would color be allowed?
Color is generally permitted in design applications since the appearance is the whole point. For utility patents, color is much rarer.
You need permission.
Yes, you need to file a formal petition, pay a fee, and convince the USPTO that color is actually necessary to understand the invention. You have to explain why black and white just won't cut it.
Like maybe for charts or graphs where color conveys specific data.
Exactly, or maybe certain biological stains or complex structures where color is the only way to distinguish elements properly. And even if they grant the petition, the color drawings have to be high quality and, importantly, still reproducible in black and white for publication purposes.
Got it. And you mentioned something about international applications.
Right, a key point. Under the PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, color drawings are generally not permitted in the international phase of an application. So if you're planning to file internationally, you usually need to stick to black and white.
How about changing drawings after you've filed? You find a mistake or need to add a detail?
You can't just mark up the old sheets. That would make the record messy.
So what do you do?
You have to submit completely new drawing sheets that incorporate the approved changes. And each figure on these new sheets needs to be clearly labeled, usually below the figure number, as amended, or if it's a totally new figure, new. If you're removing a figure, you typically submit an amendment paper saying figure X is canceled.
So it creates a clear trail of the changes.
Precisely. Maintains the integrity of the record.
Okay. And one more specific format, international designs.
Ah, yes. Applications filed under the Hague Agreement for Industrial Designs. They're a bit more flexible on the representation. You can use drawings or photographs, and they can be submitted in black and white or color.
And sometimes you submit things on disks, like computer code.
Yes. For things like lengthy computer program listings, there's an option called a computer program listing appendix. You can submit this on read-only optical disks.
Read only.
Yep. And you have to submit them in duplicate, clearly labeled copy 1 and copy 2, along with a statement confirming that the two disks are identical. Again, all about ensuring a stable, verifiable record.
Wow, okay. So pulling all these threads together, the deep legal requirements of enablement and written description, plus all these sometimes finicky formatting rules, why is MPEP 608 so critical for inventors and practitioners?
Because, fundamentally, it is the specification. It's the core description of the invention that everything else relies on. Meeting these Section 608 requirements, especially those tied to 35 U.S.C. 112A, like enablement and written description,
Yes.
it's absolutely essential, not just for getting the patent granted in the first place, but for making sure that patent is actually valid and can be enforced later if needed. A weak disclosure can doom a patent.
It really feels like the formatting rules are there almost in service of that main goal, making sure the core technical disclosure is clear and usable.
That's a great way to put it. The procedural rules, the formatting, they provide the necessary structure and clarity so that the substantive bargain your disclosure for exclusive rights can actually work. Without clear presentation, even a brilliant technical description could be lost or misunderstood. They really work together.
They ensure the public record is clear, complete, legally sound.
Exactly.
And that no new matter rule we kept coming back to, it really underscores how vital that initial disclosure is. Everything you might want to claim later has to trace back to what you put down on day one.
Precisely. It highlights the immense importance of that filing date and the content filed on that date. You can't broaden the technical scope afterwards. It's why good patent practice involves describing all aspects and variations of the invention you've thought of at the time of filing, even if you don't claim them all initially.
To give yourself options down the road without adding new matter.
Exactly right. Build that support in from the beginning.
So MPP 608 is all about laying that strong foundation, providing that detailed, understandable blueprint of the invention, following both the big legal principles and the practical rules of the road.
It truly is. It sets the standard for the core technical document that the entire patent process revolves around.
All right, as we wrap up this deep dive into MPEP Section 608, here's a thought to leave you with. Inventions are getting more and more complex, right? We're talking digital sequences, complex algorithms, huge data sets, maybe even AI models. How might the ways we need to disclose these evolving technologies challenge or maybe even reshape these foundational disclosure requirements in the future? Will the current rules always be enough?
That's a fascinating question. How do you enable someone to make and use an AI that learned in a way even its creators don't fully understand? It's something the patent world is definitely grappling with.
Something to keep an eye on. Now, before we go, we absolutely want to extend a special thank you to Mike Shepard. He's the creative director who organized this entire MPP audio series.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
And finally, just a necessary disclaimer. This summary of the MPP was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and NotebookLM, and it might contain errors or omissions. It's really for general educational and informational purposes only.
That's right. It is absolutely not legal advice, and it's not a substitute for proper formal instruction on patent law.
For any authoritative guidance, please consult the official MPP itself, talk to a qualified instructor, or seek advice from a registered patent practitioner.